Perfect. So for those of you that know Denise, you know that I definitely am not Denise. My name is Jenna Baskin. I am the CEO of MCI. I have had absolute IT gremlins all of this morning, and so Denise has kindly lent me her computer so that I can get this webinar started. But really, I'm going to be handing over to Alison Brady, who heads up our consulting division at APM Health, which MCI is part of, and she's the main part of the show. So it doesn't matter if you think I'm Denise or Jenna, because I'm not really the key speaker here. So Alison, if you can just go to the next slide. So for those of you that don't know, you are here for the 5 Ways to Help Employees Thrive session. And this is part of the MCI Solutions 20th anniversary celebration. So we have had 4 of these sessions. This is the 4th. I will show you at the bottom, there are 3 other sessions which we can give you access to as well, which we have run over the last couple of weeks. But this is the 4th and final session. Next slide, please, Alison. So this is me, not Denise. For anyone that knows, Denise was the founder of MCI 20 years ago. But this is me. I'm the CEO of MCI. Next slide, please, Alison. So I just want to start with a quick acknowledgement to country, and I appreciate somebody who told us where they were based, gave us which part of country they are from as well. But I just want to take a moment to say MCI acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. I am delivering here from Gadigal land. It would be fantastic if people let us know where they are sitting at the moment. And we acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to their elders past, present, and emerging. Next slide, please, Alison. For those of you that don't know who we are, here's a quick slide. Essentially, we have been in the business for 20 years, hence our 20-year celebration. We provide training and learning solutions. We have won so many awards, I have lost count. I think 35 is probably even incorrect. I think we're over 40 these days. But really, we've been in the game for a long time. So we often say to people, if you have any training or learning and development needs, whether it's us delivering or we need to create for you, please come and speak to us, because if we don't do it, we know who does. Next slide. I think I'm handing over to you, Alison. Yes, I am. All right. So as I mentioned, Alison heads up our consulting division. So that's Communicorp and FBG. And so we as MCI and Communicorp and FBG are part of a group called APM Health. And so we provide a variety of different services. Many of these organizations you probably work with in one way, shape or form. And so it's a fantastic offering to many of our clients that we can offer the full gamut of looking after your employees, from hiring them all the way to, unfortunately, when they have to exit in one way, shape or form, and looking after them in between. Next slide. And now I'm handing over to Alison, who, as I mentioned, is our GM of Consulting. So she heads up Communicorp and FBG, and we as MCI partner with Communicorp and FBG quite often on large-scale projects for corporates and government across Australia. And so we thought it would be fantastic for her to come and join us on our final webinar that we're having as part of our 20-year celebration, to talk about one of the more important things that we face at the moment, which is 5 ways to help our team thrive. And so with that, I'm handing over to the wonderful and lovely Alison. It's over to you.
Thanks so much, Jenna, and thank you all for joining this session today. I feel very privileged to be here with you, and a little bit old as well, because I remember very well attending MCI events. Must have been about your 5-year anniversary that I was a part of, I think, a good at least 15 years ago. My team and I used to attend quite regularly lunchtime sessions that you held. Were always very, held your sessions, held your work in very high regard. So it's fabulous to be working much more closely with MCI these days. I'm leading Communicorp and FBG groups. I know many people on the call have had the opportunity to partner with our businesses in different capacities. Just by way of background, Communicorp was founded back in 2004, actually, really with the purpose to enable Australian organisations to adopt a more proactive and preventative approach to mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. And that founding purpose has continued to guide us today. Whilst we've seen a huge amount of change generally, and I'll talk more about that shortly, but also in the mental health and wellbeing space. We provide coaching services to organisations. We do a lot of capability development, some of that in partnership with MCI, but a lot of work with mental health and wellbeing training for leaders, for employees, and a range of different strategic consulting solutions. But what we're here to talk about today is how we can help employees thrive. And importantly, I think I'd encourage you all to reflect on what we're covering today personally as well. I know we're living through, and I'll start by setting the scene, we're living through this unprecedented volume of change in the workplace. Unprecedented. So we haven't experienced this volume of change before. It's been driven by a number of things. It's been driven by technology advancement. It's influenced by the economic shifts that we're seeing at the moment, the financial challenges that we're seeing locally. The pandemic has obviously really had a significant impact on how we work, as well as mental health and wellbeing, and bringing those two things together. And this is having implications for both us as individuals, the types of skills that we need, the types of behaviours and the capabilities that are expected in the workplace, how we cope with uncertainty, change and adapt. And it's having implications for organisations as well, in terms of thinking about the structures and culture that we need to create in moving through this sort of volume of this volume of transformation. So it's creating really a shared challenge for individuals and organisations. And so I'd like to absolutely give you permission, if you're not feeling that comfortable and if things have been a little bit tough at the moment, to let you know that you're absolutely not alone in that. So we are really seeing this, the workplace change, workplace challenge, having an impact on mental health and wellbeing at work. And we're actually seeing a real resurgence in people experiencing burnout, people talking to us about feeling exhausted at work, feeling stretched, feeling stressed, which is challenging but perhaps understandable. I'm not sure, some of you might have seen, there was a recent newspaper article in The Age which talked about the fact that burnout turns 50 this year, and unfortunately we haven't been able to sort of get a lid on it. If anything, we've seen a resurgence. So we're definitely hearing from clients, talking to clients about how can we manage this increased stress and anxiety in the workplace, and in particular, what steps can we take proactively to prevent any sort of implications from a wellbeing or mental health perspective. The prevention is always the best cure. So in this context, we're going to talk today about 5 ways to help employees thrive. So I would encourage you over the next 20 minutes or so to try to dedicate your attention to the session, and so that you can walk away with something quite practical and quite helpful, both personally, and think about strategies to be supporting others. I know that many people who've joined today are in HR functions, are in learning and development functions. There are new work health and safety regulations which are actually increasing the focus that we're seeing on mental health and wellbeing training and solutions in the workplace. Absolutely sort of happy to talk about different options that we deliver with our clients, but I would hope that we've structured this session today to give you some helpful resources and helpful techniques that you can take away and start applying. So tip number 1 focuses on mindset. And this first tip is around increasing certainty. So we're quite interesting creatures, us human beings, and research actually shows that we would prefer to know that something bad is going to happen than live with the possibility of uncertainty. So again, we'd prefer to know something bad's going to happen than live with the possibility that it might happen or might not, which is a little bit counterintuitive, isn't it? But if we know something's coming, then we can mentally prepare for it, and we can quite practically prepare for that particular outcome. And if we don't know something's coming, then it gives us the opportunity to anticipate many potential scenarios. So we put a lot of energy into that negative event, what might happen, how it might happen, what might occur. And the implication being it tends to create increased stress and anxiety. So I'd be interested, as we're working through these sorts of challenges, if you can sort of share in the chat if this is something that resonates with you. Absolutely share with your colleagues any feedback, anything that you find valuable, but feel free to post questions as well as we're working through. I'm not very good at multitasking. We'll get to that shortly. I don't think many of us are as good at multitasking as we think. So I'll apologise in advance if I don't address your questions as we're going, but I can commit to one of my colleagues on the call addressing those questions from MCI or Communicorp, or getting back to you. Okay, so tip number 1, increase certainty. So what does this practically mean when we're working with people in our organisations? It means communicating what we can, sharing what is certain as transparently as possible and as early as possible. Bringing people into the change process so they have that transparency. Role modelling, really being ourselves, earning trust, following through, doing what we say we're going to do, providing clarity and consistency where we can. So all of these are probably, I'm sure many of you involved in change processes. It's really here thinking about small steps that you can take to help people have certainty and have a level of consistency in what you're doing each day. Another important way to increase certainty, we found that this really resonated with people through the COVID period, is reframing and asking what's actually in my control in this situation, focusing on what you can control rather than what you can't control. Now, I expect several, well, I shouldn't assume, but I wouldn't be surprised if several people on this call do find themselves worrying about aspects of or points that are noted there in the circle of concern, as well as perhaps the circle of control. I know I'm certainly absolutely guilty of that. But we do know that people who are more resilient tend to focus more on things within their control and let go of things that they can't control. If you think about where your energy is going, where your attention's going, is it going to the circle of concern, or is it going to things that you can personally control? Yeah. And if we're operating in the circle of concern, we tend to get more emotionally invested and tend to need to focus on emotional coping strategies to work through that. In the circle of control, then problem-focused strategies, practical, rational strategies work quite well. So I'd encourage you personally to reflect on this, and it's absolutely a tool that we find resonates very well with people in thinking about focusing on what they can control as a measure to increase certainty and reduce any associated stress and anxiety. So that's tip number 1 in helping your employees thrive, increase certainty. The next 2 points we're going to work through both focus on how you're organising your time and your work. We do a lot of work with organisations at Communicorp in understanding the factors at work that impact mental health and wellbeing. And by far and away, work design and role overload of demands, is one of the primary factors that impacts health and wellbeing. And there are practical steps that us as individuals can take to address that. There are also practical steps that organisations can take, but we'll focus at an individual level today. And sort of to set the context here, this tip's around scheduling focus time, but I think it's important to sort of think about why this is important, because we're often expected to do, or we feel we're expected to do several things at once. This ability to multitask can seem like a necessity, and it can seem quite attractive. I can personally attest to the fact that texting and walking at the same time are not a great idea. There's some obvious examples like that, but generally multitasking doesn't help us save time. So tasks take us longer to complete, we're more likely to make errors, and it's just actually quite hard work. It's cognitively very taxing and energy draining for us. And we can see some pretty damning stats on this slide here to this point. So we talk about the switching costs of multitasking as we switch between one particular task, in particular a task that requires deeper thinking, and another task. You can see here that we lose time, we lose productivity, and in fact switches are often caused by internal distractions. So being able to maintain our attention has become more and more challenging with so many different pieces of information competing for our attention day to day. Again, I'd be interested in comments in the chat as to whether people do find that they can multitask effectively, whether people find it difficult to work consistently without getting distracted. So we know that these switch costs can be really detrimental to our performance and really quite exhausting. We also know from the science that we require rest and renewal at regular intervals. And in fact, our body operates on a 90-minute rhythm, which is called the ultradian rhythm. And what that means is that we tend to work best to be able to focus for about 90 minutes at a time. And we start the beginning of that 90 minutes at our peak, if you like, and then we'll slowly sort of start to lose energy and focus through that period until we reach a point where rest and renewal is required. Often our body will send us really quite clear signals that it's time for rest, that it's time for a break, and often we'll override that. I know I've got a terrible habit at the moment of reaching for a Coke no sugar at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and trying to power through. And I also know that if I can give myself the opportunity to take a short break at that time, I come back much more focused and much more productive. So being aware of these cycles, really important first step. And then if we think about the practical step that you can take in this regard, both for yourself and supporting others, I'd encourage you to schedule 60 to 90 minutes of time each day to focus single-mindedly on your most challenging and important task for the day. So for most of us, it's absolutely not feasible for us to split our whole day into 60 or 90-minute segments. But hopefully for most of us, we can find 60 to 90 minutes most days, at least a day a week, where we can be doing that. So think about what's feasible for you, but I would encourage you to do so, to think about how you can remove interruptions, notifications, distractions. I often say try to aim for the morning, but I'm a morning person, you might not be. Think about the time of day when you're at your peak and look at your diary, practically think about how you can shift things to give yourself that time and give yourself permission to say no to others. I can see some feedback coming through the chat as well, so thank you for that. Please do keep it coming. So that's tip number 2, is scheduling focus time. Number 3, also about how we manage and design our time and our workspace, if you like. But this tip's a little bit different. This is about putting in place boundaries. And this is a resource that may be of interest to people if you'd like to explore this concept further following the session. A book called The Third Space by Dr. Adam Fraser. So when we're working with clients, we often get feedback on the challenges associated with work-life balance, or what's become work-life integration, I think, for many of us, with remote working and hybrid working in particular becoming more the norm. Dr. Adam Fraser dedicated quite a number of years of his study to working with people from different disciplines, but many from what we consider quite challenging types of roles. So people working from surgeons to palliative care nurses. And he explored how they coped with stress and sadness, and how they managed to leave that at work and not take the circumstances of the day home. And what he found was it's the transition time that counts between work and what you're doing outside of work or home. And he coined this transition space the third space. Yeah. And he said people who use that third space effectively are most productive at work and thrive at home because they're not taking some of the challenges of the day home. Yeah. And you tend to feel much more in control if you can put boundaries and barriers around your workplace. I know personally, when I work in the office or when I work at a client site, my commute creates a natural third space. It creates a transition space for me between my work and my home life. When I'm working from home, I need to be much more purposeful about thinking about this third space and thinking about how I can actively reset and move on and sort of put a boundary between what I've been thinking about, what I've been doing from a work perspective and at home. And the most effective way to work through that third space is this reflect, rest, reset sort of sequence. And what you find is as you can actively practice this sort of sequence initially, but it becomes quite natural over time. And it may be something that you're already doing if you're quite effective at creating that boundary. So reflect on what you've been doing at work, in the good, the bad, and the ugly, but then put that behind you, take space, be mindful, be in the moment from a rest perspective, and then looking forward, reset what's coming next. And sometimes doing something physical is isn't the simplest circuit breaker that you can introduce here, whether it's your commute, whether it's going to the gym, taking a walk. So that's the third space, putting in place boundaries. And again, all about how you're managing and designing sort of the work that you're doing. The last two sort of areas that we wanted to talk to you about now were more about relationships, and how we're working with people at work to protect and support our mental health and wellbeing. Here's another resource tip from me. If you've got 12 minutes following this session, it's one of my favourite TED Talks personally. What Makes a Good Life from Robert Waldinger. And the title of this slide sort of gives that away, I think. But Robert shares the outcomes of a Harvard study of adult development, which is one of the longest running studies on human development, which has provided really valuable insights into what's most important for a happy life. And what it has found is positive relationships are the most absolutely important predictor and key predictor of happiness, of health, and longevity. So he works through a number of different sort of findings of the study, but absolutely reinforces the importance of social connections, a range of social connections, both personal and work connections. He reinforces the importance of the quality of those connections over quantity. And he talks about how that's actually protective, preventative. It has mental health benefits, physical health benefits, and people with positive connections live longer. So really compelling work. What does that mean? From a personal perspective, I think it really encourages us to think about and nurture the relationships that we have. From an organisational perspective, it absolutely has implications from a cultural perspective. So how are you creating environments that foster collaboration, that enable people to be creating those positive connections? And it also reinforces the importance of leadership. So research sort of has consistently sort of demonstrates that relationships with our leaders are typically second only to our relationships with partners or spouse in terms of the impact that that has on our well-being and our satisfaction. Relationships with leaders second only to relationships with a significant other, typically, in terms of their impact on us. Clearly, it's a very different type of relationship that we're talking about. Which brings me to the final point that we wanted to work through today in the time that we have available, which is the importance of role modelling supportive leadership and really making sure that the leaders in your organisation are effectively equipped to create the type of environment that does enable employees to thrive, and that your leaders are equipped to step in, respond, support, and nurture people when something might not be right. I expect many of you have leadership models, leadership frameworks in place in your organisation that outline the types of behaviours that are expected, leadership development programs, and certainly we're doing a lot more work in this space because leaders do have that fundamental role to play. They cast a significant shadow across their team and organisation. And a lot of the behaviours that we are talking to organisations about and really supporting leaders to think about in how they show up and develop are listed on this slide. But we also wanted to provide you with a couple of practical tools that you can take back and use with your leaders in your organisations, and you will have access to these slides. So sometimes just having conversations about wellbeing can be quite uncomfortable if it's not something that you're used to doing. So I would really encourage people to be looking out for signs when people might not seem quite right, because the earliest we can catch concerns regarding mental health, wellbeing, stress at work, the more likely we are to turn that around really successfully without negative impacts from a work perspective, from an individual perspective. It's a whole range of different signs, and it's likely to look differently for different people. But be aware that if you are seeing these types of factors that are outlined on this slide, and as I said, we'll follow this up, then it's okay to ask, it's okay to check in with people and explore whether they're okay, explore whether they need any support. And there's different frameworks and structures that you can put in place around this, but absolutely equipping leaders with those core communication skills in actively listening is critical, and communicating clearly the supports that are available to people in your organisation. So communicating the EAP supports, being aware of different avenues that people can take, and so that people don't feel they have to be the solution in and of themselves, which isn't appropriate either. And a whole series of sort of do's and don'ts. So I appreciate, sort of knew that we wouldn't have time to do all of this justice in today's session, but wanted to give you something practical as well to take away and start to share with leaders if that's helpful, but very happy to have further conversations about how to introduce these frameworks and tools to equip leaders in having those mental health and wellbeing conversations and supporting their teams. So in summary, opportunities, hopefully some practical opportunities that you can personally take away, thinking about how we can increase certainty and focus on things that you can control. Scheduling focus time to your diary, really practical step we can take to get more done more efficiently and more comfortably. Putting in place boundaries, and so that we aren't letting work seep outside or seep across all aspects of our life. Prioritising positive relationships and really role modelling that supportive leadership. So thank you so much for your time and the flying tour through this. Really hope that was valuable. Jenna, I might hand back to you to wrap and just share if there's any key questions or points we should cover in conclusion.
Thank you so much, Alison. If you can pop over to the next slide, please, that would be great. So there were quite a few comments. I wouldn't say they were questions, just reading. So a few people were commenting as you were going about some of the things that you were saying in terms of distractions. The third space, I love this. Somebody said that when they take their dog for a walk, that's their third space. I've changed my clothes for it too, which helps with transition. That's excellent. So there were quite a few comments, Alison. Obviously, if anyone has questions, please continue to pop them into chat. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Alison. So as I mentioned earlier, for those of you that were a little bit late, this is our final session of our 20-year celebration at MCI. So if you want access to session 1, 2, or 3, please type into chat or write to us. Vanessa, who's on the call from the MCI team, will be able to send the recordings to you. They were equally as fantastic as Alison's session. And so if you do want access to those 30 minutes, please let us know. Next slide, please. One final thing that I'm going to say, as part of our 20-year anniversary campaign, we have partnered and continue to partner for many years with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance. It's currently September. Many of your businesses will be doing that. And so what we're doing to increase even more dollars that we're giving to September is if you hop onto LinkedIn or Google or anywhere and leave a comment or review for MCI for our 20-year campaign. If you have used our services, that would be even better. But for every comment or review, we're going to donate an additional $20. So that campaign is going really, really well. And just to wrap up, obviously a huge thank you to Alison. For those of you who missed the beginning, Alison heads up our consulting division, which is made up of Communicorp and FBG. MCI is part of the same group as Communicorp and FBG's consulting divisions, that is APM Health. And so we partner on a lot of programs supporting clients across Australia. So if you have any questions or needs, please reach out to us. If you have any questions about the session, please reach out to us as well. We will be sending a recording around, so you can share those with your colleagues or anyone in your team or network. But if you need anything further, please do reach out. Thank you so much for coming today. It was lovely to see you all, and the levels of engagement, we really appreciate it. Look after yourselves, and we will see you at another MCI session soon. Thank you, everyone.